The rain had been falling steadily for 3 hours when James Mitchell pulled his beat-up Toyota into the grocery store parking lot. The windshield wipers squeaked against the glass, a sound that had become as familiar as his daughter's morning complaints about cereal brands. At 34, James had grown accustomed to the symphony of things breaking down around him: his car, his apartment's heating system, and most days, his own spirit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He sat for a moment, engine running, watching the water cascade down the windshield. Grocery shopping on a Tuesday evening wasn't exactly thrilling, but it was necessary. 8-year-old Emma had specifically requested mac and cheese for dinner, and James had learned long ago that disappointed children were far more exhausting than wet clothes and empty bank accounts. The parking lot was nearly deserted, save for a few scattered vehicles and the occasional shopper hurrying through the downpour with their collar turned up against the weather. James grabbed his worn leather jacket from the passenger seat and prepared to make the dash to the store entrance when something caught his eye near the bus stop across the street. A figure in white sat hunched on the metal bench, completely still, despite the rain soaking through what appeared to be an elaborate dress. James squinted through the water-streaked window, his heart skipping when he realized what he was seeing: a woman in a wedding dress, alone in the middle of a storm. His first instinct was to look away. Life had taught James Mitchell that getting involved in other people's problems usually led to complications he couldn't afford. Single fathers working 2 jobs and barely making rent didn't have the luxury of playing Good Samaritan, but something about the complete stillness of the figure bothered him. She wasn't checking her phone, wasn't looking around for rescue, wasn't even trying to shield herself from the rain. She just sat there, as if the world had stopped moving around her. James turned off the engine and stepped out into the storm. The cold water immediately soaked through his jacket, sending a chill down his spine as he jogged across the street. Up close, he could see that the woman was young, probably in her mid-20s, with dark hair that had escaped from what must have once been an elegant updo. Her makeup had run in streaks down her cheeks, though whether from rain or tears, he couldn't tell. "Miss," James called out, raising his voice above the sound of rain hitting the metal bus shelter, "are you okay?" She looked up slowly, as if emerging from a deep dream. Her eyes were a striking green, but they held an emptiness that made James's chest tighten. For several seconds, she simply stared at him, as though trying to process that. Someone was actually speaking to her. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the storm. The words came out automatically, the kind of response people give when they're anything but fine. James glanced around the empty street, then back at the soaked woman in the elaborate gown. The dress had probably cost more than he made in 3 months. All silk and lace and tiny pearl buttons that caught what little light filtered through the storm clouds. Now it clung to her frame, heavy with rainwater, transforming what had surely been a vision of bridal perfection into something tragic and surreal. "When's the next bus supposed to come?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her despite the water pooling on the metal surface. She turned to look at him with surprise, as if the question had never occurred to her. I don't know. I wasn't really waiting for a bus." She shook her head slowly. "I don't know what I was doing. I just needed to sit down." James studied her profile as she stared out at the empty street. There was something refined about her features, a kind of elegance that seemed at odds with her current circumstances, the kind of woman who probably attended charity galas and knew which fork to use for salad. Definitely not the kind of woman who typically found herself stranded at bus stops in industrial parts of town. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand. "Sophia?" she replied after a moment's hesitation, her handshake surprisingly firm despite the tremor in her voice. Sophia Chen. Well, Sophia Chen, I was just about to grab some groceries, but I'm thinking maybe we should get you somewhere dry. First, there's a diner about 2 blocks from here that stays open late. Sophia turned to face him fully for the first time, studying his face with those remarkable green eyes. James felt suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. The 3-day stubble he hadn't had time to shave, the jacket with the torn pocket from where Emma had gotten it caught on a playground fence, the general weariness that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. Why, she asked simply. The question caught him off guard. Why what? Why are you helping me? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be... She gestured vaguely at herself, as if the wedding dress explained everything. James considered this. It was a fair question, and he wasn't entirely sure of the answer. Himself, maybe it was because he recognized something in her expression, the particular kind of lost that came from having your life derailed in a single moment. Maybe it was because he remembered what it felt like to sit alone in public places, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. My daughter Emma always tells me that helping people is just what you do, he said finally. She's 8 and apparently wiser than both of us. Something shifted in Sophia's expression at the mention of his daughter. The emptiness in her eyes flickered, replaced by a brief spark of curiosity. You have a daughter? I do. She's probably at home right now, building elaborate forts out of couch cushions and wondering why her dad is taking so long to bring home dinner. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. She sounds wonderful. She is. She's also extremely particular about her mac and cheese brand preferences, which is why I really do need to get to that grocery store eventually. James stood up, water dripping from his jacket. But first, let's get you somewhere warm. I promise I'm not a serial killer or anything equally terrifying, just a guy who's been where you are, maybe not in a wedding dress, but definitely in the sitting in the rain, wondering what the hell happened department. For the first time since he'd approached her, Sophia almost smiled. It was barely there, just a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth, but it transformed her entire face. I suppose I can't sit here forever, she said, gathering the soaked fabric of her dress as she stood. The movement revealed delicate silver shoes that were completely impractical for walking anywhere, let alone through puddles and city streets. Those are going to be a problem, James observed, nodding toward her feet. Sophia looked down, as if seeing her shoes for the first time. Everything about this is a problem. They made their way slowly toward James's car, Sophia moving carefully in the elaborate dress and ridiculous shoes. James found himself wanting to ask what had happened, how she'd ended up alone at a bus stop in a wedding gown, but something about her posture warned him off. Whatever story she carried was still too fresh, too raw to share with a stranger. Saka. Car ride to the diner was quiet, except for the continued drumming of rain against the roof and the rhythmic squeak of the windshield wipers. James turned up the heat, hoping to combat the chill that seemed to radiate from his passenger. Sophia sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window at the blurred lights of the city. "Thank you," she said suddenly as they pulled into the diner's parking lot. For what? For not asking. James understood. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was let them carry their secrets until they were ready to set them down. The Bluebird Diner had seen better decades, but it was warm and bright and smelled like coffee and pie. The hostess, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and sensible shoes, took one look at Sophia and immediately led them to a corner booth, bringing towels without being asked. "Rough night, honey," she said gently, setting a steaming cup of coffee in front of Sophia. "Something like that," Sophia replied, wrapping her hands around the mug as if it were a lifeline. James ordered coffee for himself and a piece of apple pie to share, figuring that sugar and caffeine were probably good starting points for whatever this situation was. He watched Sophia slowly warm up, color returning to her cheeks as the heat from the diner began to penetrate the chill that had settled into her bones. "I should call someone," she said eventually, though she made no move toward her phone. "Should you?" She considered this. "I suppose that depends on whether there's anyone I actually want to talk to right now." James took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of his mug. Up close, in the warm light of the diner, he could see that Sophia was even more beautiful than he'd first realized. But it wasn't just her physical appearance. There was something about the way she held herself, even in her bedraggled state, that spoke of inner strength. Whatever had happened to her tonight, she wasn't broken, bent maybe, shaken, but not broken. "Want to talk about it?" he offered. Sophia was quiet for so long that James began to think she hadn't heard him. Finally, she looked up from her coffee. "Cup, have you ever built your entire life around someone else's vision of who you should be?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question hit James harder than he'd expected. His mind immediately went to Emma's mother, to the years he'd spent trying to be the man she wanted instead of the man he was, to the career path he'd abandoned, the dreams he'd shelved, the version of himself he'd lost somewhere in the process of trying to fit into someone else's idea of happiness. "Yeah," he said simply. "I have." "And then one day you wake up and realize you don't even recognize yourself anymore?" James nodded. "That sounds familiar." Sophia took a shaky breath. "Today was supposed to be my wedding day, to a man who—" She paused, searching for the right words. "To a man who loved the idea of me but never bothered to learn who I actually was." The pieces began falling into place. The expensive dress, the refined manner, the particular kind of devastation that came from having your entire future collapse in a single moment. What happened? I stood there in the bridal suite, looking at myself in the mirror, and I realized I felt absolutely nothing. No joy, no excitement, no anticipation, just emptiness, like I was watching someone else's life happen to me. Sophia's voice grew steadier as she continued. "So I left. I walked out of the church, got in my car, and just drove until I couldn't anymore, and ended up at a bus stop. Apparently, my subconscious has a flair for the dramatic." James found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in weeks. Well, if you're going to have a breakdown, might as well do it with style. Sophia looked surprised by his reaction, then laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. The sound was warm and genuine, completely at odds with the tragic figure he'd found sitting in the rain. "My mother is probably having a heart attack right about now," she said, though she didn't sound particularly concerned about this. "She spent 2 years planning this wedding. 2 years of flower arrangements and seating charts and discussions about the proper shade of ivory for table linens. But what did you spend 2 years doing?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, frowning. I'm not sure. Going along with it, I suppose. Being the perfect fiancé. Smiling and nodding, and trying on dresses and pretending I cared about centerpieces." She shook her head. "God, when did I become so passive? When did I stop having opinions about my own life?" James thought about his own journey to that realization, the slow erosion of his sense of self, the way he'd gradually stopped voicing his preferences until he'd forgotten what they were. "It happens gradually," he said, "like gaining weight or losing your hair. You don't notice it day by day, but then one morning you look in the mirror and wonder who's looking back at you." "Exactly." Sophia's eyes lit up with recognition. You understand. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared experience settling between them. Outside, the rain continued its steady percussion against the diner windows, but inside their corner booth, something had shifted. The desperate urgency of the earlier evening had given way to something calmer, more thoughtful. "So what now?" James asked. "I have absolutely no idea," Sophia admitted. "I don't even have anywhere to go tonight. I was living in Richard's, my fiancé's apartment. Well, his parents' apartment, technically. Everything I own is there, but I can't exactly show up in a wedding dress asking to collect my things." "What about family? Friends?" Sophia's expression darkened slightly. "My family. Let's just say they're going to see this as the ultimate betrayal. In their world, you don't walk out on advantageous marriages. And my friends." She trailed off, looking uncertain. "What about them?" "I'm realizing I'm not sure which of them were actually my friends and which were just part of Richard's social circle. It's amazing how unclear these things become when your life implodes." James understood this too. When his relationship with Emma's mother had ended, he'd discovered that most of their mutual friends had been more hers than theirs. The loneliness that followed had been almost as devastating as the breakup itself. "Well," he said, making a decision that surprised even him, "you're welcome to crash on my couch tonight. It's not much, but it's dry and warm, and Emma makes excellent pancakes in the morning." Sophia stared at him as if he'd suggested they fly to the moon together. "You're inviting a complete stranger to spend the night in your home, where your daughter lives." Put that way, it did sound fairly reckless. James had always prided himself on being a cautious parent, the kind of father who triple-checked playground equipment and never let Emma out of his sight in crowded places. But something about Sophia felt safe in a way he couldn't quite explain. "You're not exactly giving off dangerous vibes," he said. "More like lost puppy than serial killer." "I could be a very sophisticated con artist." "Are you?" "No." "Then I think we're probably okay." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to read something there. "Why are you being so kind to me?" It was the second time she'd asked him a version of this question, and James found himself thinking more carefully about the answer. Why was he inserting himself into this woman's crisis? Why was he offering his home to someone he'd known for less than 2 hours? "Because," he said finally, "sometimes when everything falls apart, the only thing that saves you is a stranger who's willing to see you as a person instead of a problem. And because—" He paused, surprised by his own honesty, "because I think maybe we both need to remember what it feels like to trust our instincts instead of doing what we think we're supposed to do." The drive to James's apartment complex took them through neighborhoods that gradually shifted from commercial strips to residential streets lined with modest 2-story buildings. Sophia watched the scenery change through the passenger window, noting how different this part of the city felt from the manicured suburbs where she'd spent the last 3 years of her life. Here, children's bicycles leaned against front porches, and gardens grew wild with whatever flowers had managed to survive without professional landscaping. "It's not exactly what you're probably used to," James said, as they pulled into the parking lot of Maple Grove Apartments, a complex that had clearly seen several decades of tenants come and go. "Actually, it reminds me of where I grew up," Sophia replied, surprising them both, "before my parents decided that status was more important than happiness." James cut the engine and looked at her with curiosity. This was the first glimpse she'd offered into her past, and it painted a picture that contrasted sharply with the expensive wedding dress and obvious wealth that had surrounded her planned marriage. They climbed the external staircase to the second floor, Sophia managing the steps carefully in her impractical shoes and waterlogged gown. James paused at apartment 2B, fishing his keys from his pocket with hands that were suddenly nervous. What was he doing, bringing a stranger home to the space he shared with Emma? What kind of father was he? Second thoughts, Sophia asked softly, noticing his hesitation. Third and fourth thoughts, actually, James admitted. But I'm going to trust that voice that told me to stop at the bus stop in the first place. He opened the door to reveal a living space that was small but undeniably warm. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable. A brown leather couch that had seen better years positioned across from a television that Emma had decorated with colourful stickers around the edges. Books were stacked on every available surface, and children's artwork covered one wall like a gallery of crayon masterpieces. "Daddy," a small voice called from down the hallway, "you were gone forever. I made a castle out of all the couch cushions, but then I put them back because I knew you'd be tired when you got home." Emma appeared in the doorway to the living room, wearing pajamas covered in cartoon dinosaurs and fuzzy slippers that made her feet look enormous. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had gone slightly lopsided during her evening activities, and her face held the kind of open curiosity that only children possessed. She stopped short when she saw Sophia, her eyes widening as she took in the elaborate dress and the stranger's presence in their home. "Whoa," she breathed. "Are you a princess?" Sophia looked down at her bedraggled appearance and laughed, the sound lighter than it had been all evening. "Not exactly, sweetie. More like a princess who had a very bad day." "I'm Emma," the little girl announced, apparently unbothered by the unusual circumstances. "I'm 8 and I lost my first tooth last week, see?" She demonstrated the gap in her smile with obvious pride. "I'm Sophia. That's a very impressive tooth gap." Emma beamed and turned to her father. "Daddy, did you remember the mac and cheese? Because I'm really hungry, and I practiced piano for a whole extra 10 minutes, even though Mrs. Henderson wasn't here to check." James felt a familiar tug of guilt at the realization that he'd completely forgotten about grocery shopping in the chaos of the evening. His daughter had been waiting for dinner while he'd been playing Good Samaritan to a stranger. "Actually, I got a little sidetracked tonight, but I think we have some pasta in the pantry, and I can make that sauce you like with the tomatoes and cheese." "Can Sophia stay for dinner?" Emma asked with the straightforward hospitality of childhood. "She looks really hungry, and also kind of sad." Sophia's expression softened at the child's directness. "That's very kind of you, Emma, but I don't want to impose on your family dinner." "It's not imposing if I invited you," Emma replied with 8-year-old logic. "Besides, Daddy always makes too much food anyway. He says it's because he grew up in a big family, but I think it's because he's not very good at math." "I'm standing." "Right here," James protested, though he was smiling. "It's okay, Daddy. We all have things we're not good at. I'm terrible at tying my shoes, but I'm excellent at finding lost things." While James rummaged through the kitchen cabinets, assembling dinner from whatever ingredients he could find, Emma appointed herself as Sophia's tour guide and interviewer. She showed off her art supplies, her collection of rocks from various playground expeditions, and her bookshelf, which contained an eclectic mix of picture books and chapter books that she was practicing reading for when I'm older. "Why are you wearing such a fancy dress?" Emma asked, as they settled at the small dining table that James had squeezed into a corner of the living room. Sophia considered how to answer this question honestly without overwhelming a child with adult complications. "I was supposed to go to a very important party today, but I decided I didn't want to go after all." "Was it a boring grown-up party with no cake and lots of talking?" "Something like that." Emma nodded sagely. "I hate those kinds of parties. Once, my mom made me go to one of her work things, and I had to wear a dress that was really itchy, and all the adults kept asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I think that's a stupid question because I already am something. I'm Emma." Sophia looked across the table at James, who was serving pasta into mismatched bowls with the efficiency of long practice. There was something about Emma's matter-of-fact wisdom that cut straight to the heart of things in a way that adult conversation rarely managed. "You're absolutely right," Sophia said. That is a stupid question. You're already perfect just being Emma. Exactly. Daddy understands that too. He never asks me what I want to be. He just asks me what I want to do tomorrow, which is a much better question. During dinner, Emma chatted about her day, the book she was reading about a girl who discovered dragons in her backyard, the new friend she'd made at the after-school program, her plans to teach her stuffed animals how to play board games. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Sophia found herself genuinely laughing for the first time in months. James watched this interaction with growing amazement. Emma had always been social, but she was typically shy around new adults, especially in their home. Yet here she was, treating Sophia like a long-time family friend, asking questions about her favorite colors and whether she'd ever seen a real peacock. Sophia probably needs to rest, James said, when Emma began outlining elaborate plans for a morning adventure to the park. She's had a really long day. Oh, you can sleep in my room if you want, Emma offered immediately. I have bunk beds, even though it's just me, because I got them at a garage sale, and Daddy said they were too good a deal to pass up. You can have the top bunk. It's closer to the glow-in-the-dark stars I put on the ceiling. That's incredibly sweet of you, Sophia said, but I think your dad was planning for me to use the couch. Emma looked between the adults with the calculating expression of a child who sensed there were undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Are you and Daddy friends now? She asked. It was such a simple question, but it made both adults pause. Were they friends? They'd known each other for less than 4 hours, but something had developed between them during their conversation at the diner, a recognition, a ease that typically took much longer to build. I think we might be, Sophia said carefully. Good, Emma declared. Daddy needs more friends. He works too much and worries too much, and sometimes I catch him staring at bills with his scary face on. Emma, James warned, but he was smiling. It's true. You get this wrinkle right here, she pointed to her own forehead, and you make little grumbly noises like an angry bear. After Emma had been convinced to get ready for bed with promises that Sophia would still be there in the morning, James set about making the couch as comfortable as possible with extra pillows and blankets. The apartment felt different with Sophia in it, smaller in some ways, but also warmer, as if her presence had added something that had been missing. Your daughter is remarkable, Sophia said as James arranged the makeshift bed. She has this way of seeing straight through to what matters. She gets that from her mother, James replied automatically, then paused. It was the first time he'd mentioned Emma's mother, and he wasn't sure why the words had slipped out. Where is her mother now? James sat down heavily in the armchair across from the couch, suddenly looking every one of his 34 years. Jessica, left when Emma was 3, said she wasn't cut out for the whole domestic life thing, that she felt trapped by motherhood and responsibility. He ran a hand through his hair. I tried to make it work, tried to be everything she needed, but I guess I wasn't enough. Sophia heard the echo of her own recent realization in his words, the exhausting attempt to become someone else's vision of the perfect partner. Maybe it wasn't about you not being enough, she said gently. Maybe she just wasn't ready to be who the situation needed her to be. James looked at her with surprise. In the 5 years since Jessica had left, most people had either offered platitudes about how she'd missed out on a wonderful family, or hinted that he must have done something to drive her away. No one had ever suggested that sometimes people simply weren't equipped for the roles they found themselves in, without it being anyone's fault. Emma asks about her sometimes, he continued. I try to explain it in ways she can understand, but how do you tell a child that her mother chose a different life over being her mom? You tell her the truth in the simplest way possible, Sophia said. That her mother wasn't ready to be the kind of mom Emma deserved, but that has nothing to do with Emma's worth as a person. James nodded slowly. This was territory he rarely discussed with anyone, let alone a woman he'd just met. But something about Sophia invited honesty. Maybe because she'd already shown him her own broken places. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. What did your fiancé see when he looked at you? What version of you was he trying to marry?" Sophia pulled the blanket James had given her more tightly around her shoulders, considering the question. "The perfect society wife, I think. Someone who would look good at business dinners and charity events, who would manage his social calendar and make small talk with clients' wives, someone decorative and agreeable, who wouldn't challenge his decisions or have inconvenient opinions." "And what do you see when you look at yourself?" The question caught her off guard. She'd spent so long trying to see herself through other people's eyes, her parents', Richard's, society's, that she'd almost forgotten to develop her own perspective. "I used to love to paint," she said slowly. "Before college, before I met Richard, before everything became about being appropriate and marriageable, I painted these wild, abstract pieces that didn't match any decor and served no practical purpose except that they made me happy to create them." "What happened to that?" Richard said they were juvenile, that they didn't fit with the sophisticated image we were trying to project. "So I stopped." She laughed bitterly. "I actually threw them all away before we moved in together. I thought I was being mature, letting go of childish things." James felt a surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. What kind of person asked? Someone to throw away pieces of their soul? "I still have some of Emma's finger paintings from when she was 2, he said. "They're terrible by any objective artistic standard, but they're tacked up on my bedroom wall because they remind me of how excited she was to show them to me. She's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other. After Jessica left, it was just the two of us figuring things out together. Emma taught me how to be her dad, the same way I taught her how to tie her shoes, with a lot of patience and practice, and the understanding that it's okay to mess up as long as you keep trying." Sophia studied his face in the soft lamplight, noting the way his entire demeanor changed when he talked about his daughter. This was what Richard had never understood, that love wasn't about molding someone into your ideal, but about celebrating who they already were. "Tell me about a typical day," she said. "You and Emma," James smiled, settling back in his chair. "We get up at 6:30, which is about 30 minutes later than we should because Emma has perfected the art of creative snoozing. I make coffee while she feeds her fish. His name is Captain Bubbles, and she's convinced he recognizes her voice. We eat breakfast together, usually cereal or toast, nothing fancy. I drop her off at school on my way to work." "What do you do for work?" "I manage the parts department at Henderson Auto Repair. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and my boss is flexible when Emma gets sick or has school events. I pick her up from the after-school program at 5:30. We come home. She does homework while I figure out dinner. Evenings are for reading together or board games, or just talking about whatever's on her mind." Sophia tried to imagine this. Routine, so different from the elaborate social calendar that had governed her life with Richard. Charity luncheons and gallery openings and dinner parties where the conversation never strayed beyond safe, superficial topics. "It sounds peaceful," she said, "most of the time. There are days when I worry I'm not giving her enough. Not enough opportunities, not enough experiences, not enough of the advantages that other kids have. But then she'll do something like tonight, just automatically including you in our family dinner, and I think maybe we're doing okay." "She included me because that's who she is," Sophia said, "and she's who she is because of how you've raised her. You've taught her that people matter more than appearances, that kindness is more valuable than status." James looked at her with something approaching wonder. When was the last time someone had validated his parenting choices instead of questioning them? When was the last time someone had seen his life as valuable rather than lacking? "What about you?" he asked. "If you could do anything, be anyone, what would that look like?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "I think I'd like to teach," she said finally. "Art, maybe, or elementary school. Something where I could help kids stay connected to their creativity instead of learning to suppress it for the sake of being appropriate." "What's stopping you?" "Everything. I have a degree in art history, but it was always meant to be decorative. Something cultured and refined that would make me a more interesting dinner party guest. I've never actually worked, never supported myself. I wouldn't even know where to start." "You start by starting," James said simply. "Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, always tells the kids that every expert was once a beginner. The hard part isn't figuring out how to do everything perfectly, it's having the courage to try something imperfectly." Sophia looked at him with growing admiration. Here was a man who'd been left to raise a child alone, who worked long hours, at a job that probably didn't pay enough, who lived in a modest apartment and drove a car that needed repairs. Yet he radiated a contentment that she'd never achieved, despite having every material advantage. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you make it look so easy to just be yourself?" James laughed. "Easy, Sophia. I spend half my time terrified that I'm screwing everything up. I lie awake at night, wondering if Emma's going to need therapy someday because I gave her peanut butter sandwiches too many days in a row, or because I couldn't afford to send her to summer camp with her friends. But you keep going. I keep going because Emma needs me to keep going, and because I've learned that being imperfect is still better than pretending to be someone you're not." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day finally settling over them both. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind the clean, fresh smell that comes after a storm. "James?" Sophia said softly. "Yeah? Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for showing me what it looks like when someone chooses authenticity over appearance. I haven't seen that in a long time. Thank you for reminding me that taking a risk on another person can lead to something good instead of something complicated." As James gathered the extra pillows and checked that Sophia had everything she needed for the night, he found himself marveling at the strange turns life could take. This morning, he'd been a single father focused entirely on getting through. Another day of work and parenting responsibilities. Tonight, he was harboring a runaway bride and having the most honest conversation he'd had with another adult in years. "Good night, Sophia," he said from the doorway. "Good night, James, and thank you for seeing me." He paused at her words, understanding exactly what she meant. Not seeing the wedding dress or the drama or the complications, but seeing her, the person underneath all of that, the woman who painted abstract art and wanted to teach children, and had somehow lost herself in the process of trying to become someone else's ideal. "Sweet dreams," he said, and meant it, as he lay in his own bed later, listening to the familiar sounds of his daughter sleeping in the next room and the unfamiliar sound of another person breathing in his living space. James reflected on the evening's events. Tomorrow would bring practical concerns, where Sophia would go, how she would rebuild her life, whether this strange intersection of their paths was meant to be temporary or something more lasting. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, his small apartment felt full instead of just sufficient. Tonight, he'd been reminded that sometimes the best thing you could do for another person was simply to see them clearly and accept what you found there. And tomorrow, he thought, as sleep began to claim him, Emma would wake up excited to continue her conversation with their unexpected house guest, probably with a dozen new questions and at least 3 elaborate plans for adventure. Whatever came next, it would certainly not be boring. Sophia woke to the sound of hushed giggling and the smell of something burning. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the soft morning light filtering through curtains that weren't hers, the gentle sounds of a household waking up. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up on the couch, still wearing the wrinkled wedding dress that now felt like a costume from someone else's life. "Daddy, I think the pancakes are getting black on the bottom." Emma's voice carried from the kitchen, followed by James's muttered response that was too quiet to make out. "Maybe we should wake up Sophia and ask if she knows how to make pancakes," Emma suggested with the practical logic of childhood. "Let her sleep, Em. She had a really tough day yesterday. But I want to show her my rock collection and my fish, and I want to ask her if she's ever been to Disneyland, because I've been saving up my allowance to go there someday." Sophia smiled despite herself, charmed by Emma's enthusiasm. She stood up, smoothing down the ruined dress as best she could, and padded toward the kitchen in her bare feet. The silver wedding shoes sat abandoned by the couch, looking as impractical. In the morning light, as they had felt the night before. "Good morning," she said from the kitchen doorway. James turned from the stove, wearing a faded green t-shirt and jeans, his hair still messy from sleep. He looked younger in the morning light, less weighed down by the careful responsibility he'd carried the night before. "Did we wake you?" Emma was trying to help with breakfast, but apparently my pancake flipping skills need work. "I heard something about black bottoms," Sophia said, moving closer to peer at the pan. The pancakes were indeed quite dark around. The edges, though not entirely beyond saving. "See? I told you they were getting burny," Emma announced triumphantly. She had climbed onto a chair next to the stove, wearing bright purple leggings and a t-shirt with a cartoon cat on it. Her hair was pulled back in a neater ponytail than the night before, suggesting that James had conquered the morning routine despite the distraction of house guests and burning breakfast. "Mind if I try?" Sophia asked, gesturing toward the stove. James stepped aside gratefully, handing her the spatula. "Be my guest. Emma's been bragging about your potential pancake skills since she woke up." "I never said anything about pancakes," Emma protested. "I just said that princesses probably know how to cook because they have to take care of themselves when they're locked in towers." Sophia laughed, testing the heat of the pan and adjusting the burner. "Well, I'm not exactly a princess, but I did spend a lot of time in the kitchen with my grandmother when I was your age. She taught me that the secret to good pancakes is patience and the right temperature." She poured fresh batter into the pan, watching it bubble and settle. There was something soothing about this simple domestic task, so different from the elaborate brunches she'd grown accustomed to, where everything was prepared by caterers and served on china that cost more than James probably made in a week. "What happened to your grandmother?" Emma asked, settling back into her chair to watch Sophia work. "She passed away when I was in college, but she taught me a lot about cooking and gardening, and—" Sophia paused, flipping a perfectly golden pancake. "And about staying true to yourself even when other people want you to be someone different. Did you forget what she taught you?" Emma asked with the directness that only children possessed. The question hit Sophia harder than she'd expected. Had she forgotten? Or had she simply chosen to ignore those lessons in favor of fitting into a world that valued appearance over authenticity? "I think maybe I did forget for a while," she admitted. "But sometimes people come into your life to remind you of important things you've lost track of." She glanced at James, who was watching this exchange with something approaching wonder. How long had it been since someone had engaged with Emma's questions so thoughtfully, treating her curiosity as valuable rather than simply cute? "Like how Daddy reminded you about being yourself," Emma suggested. Something like that. They ate breakfast together at the small table, Emma monopolizing the conversation with detailed descriptions of her various collections and elaborate plans for the day. She had apparently decided that Sophia's presence meant automatic participation in all of her favorite activities, from feeding Captain Bubbles to exploring the playground behind their apartment complex. Sophia might have other things she needs to do today, James said gently, when Emma began outlining an itinerary that would have kept them busy until dinner time. For the first time since waking up, Sophia felt the weight of reality settling back over her. She did have things to do, important practical things, like figuring out where she was going to live, how she was going to support herself, what she was going to say to her family and Richard, and the hundreds of wedding guests who had presumably gathered yesterday, only to discover that the bride had vanished. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, hearing the easy rhythm of this family's morning routine, she found herself reluctant to step back into the chaos of her disrupted life. "Actually," she said slowly, "I don't have anywhere I need to be today." It was true in more ways than one. For the first time in years, her calendar wasn't packed with obligations and appointments. No charity committee meetings, no dress fittings, no social events where she was expected to smile and nod and be decoratively agreeable. "Really?" Emma's face lit up. "So you can come to the playground? And maybe help me teach Captain Bubbles? A new trick? I'd love to." After breakfast, James disappeared into his bedroom to make some phone calls about work, leaving Sophia and Emma to tackle the morning dishes together. Emma proved to be a surprisingly capable helper, drying each plate with serious concentration while chattering about everything from her favorite books to her theories about why fish didn't need blankets. "Sophia," Emma said as they finished putting, "away the last of the silverware, yes? Are you going to marry my daddy?" The question was so unexpected that Sophia nearly dropped the coffee mug she was holding. She turned to look at Emma, who was watching her with the matter-of-fact curiosity that seemed to be her default expression. That's not really how these things work, sweetie. Your dad and I just met yesterday. I know, but you like each other. I can tell because you both get smiley when you talk to each other, and you don't get that fake nice voice that some grown-ups use when they're pretending to be interested." Sophia marveled at the child's perceptiveness. Emma had picked up on something that she herself was only beginning to acknowledge, that her conversation with James felt different from any interaction she'd had in years. Natural, unguarded, real. "Your dad is a very good man," she said carefully, "and you're a very special little girl, but sometimes people can care about each other without getting married." Emma considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Okay," she said finally, "but if you did want to marry him, I think that would be nice. He gets lonely sometimes, even though he tries to hide it, and you seem like you'd be fun to have around." Before Sophia could formulate a response to this declaration, James reappeared from his bedroom, pulling on a light jacket. "That was my boss," he explained. "We've got a rush job that came in this morning. Someone needs their transmission rebuilt by Monday, and I'm the only one who knows how to source the parts they need. You have to work today?" Emma's face fell with disappointment. "I'm sorry, Em. I know we had plans, but this is important. Mrs. Patterson next door can watch you until I get back. What about Sophia? Can't she stay with me instead?" James looked uncertain, glancing between his daughter and their houseguest. "Sophia probably has her own things she needs to take care of today." "Actually," Sophia found herself saying, "I'd be happy to stay with Emma, if that would help. We already have a full agenda of playground activities and fish training." "Are you sure? I mean, you don't have any experience with 8-year-olds? I was one once, and besides, Emma seems pretty capable of managing herself. I'd just be along for moral support." James hesitated for another moment, clearly torn between practical necessity and protective instinct. But something in Sophia's expression seemed to reassure him. "Okay," he said finally, "but Em, you follow all the regular rules, understand? No leaving the apartment complex, no talking to strangers, and you do what Sophia tells you." "I know. Daddy, I'm very responsible." "You are very responsible," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "I should be back by early afternoon." After James left, Emma immediately began implementing her ambitious plans for the day. They started with a formal introduction to Captain Bubbles, a small goldfish who lived in a bowl decorated with colorful gravel and a tiny plastic castle. "He's very smart," Emma explained seriously as they sprinkled food into the water. "Watch how he comes to the front when I tap on the glass. That means he recognizes me." Sophia watched the fish swim in lazy circles, noting the careful way Emma measured out exactly the right amount of food and checked the water temperature with her finger. "How long have you had Captain Bubbles?" "Since my 6th birthday. Daddy said a fish would be good practice for taking care of something, and if I did a good job, maybe we could talk about getting a dog when I'm older." "And have you done a good job?" "I think so. Captain Bubbles is still alive and he seems happy. Daddy says happiness is more important than being perfect." They spent the morning at the playground behind the apartment complex where Emma demonstrated her mastery of the monkey bars and enlisted Sophia's help in building an elaborate fairy house out of twigs and leaves. Other children drifted in and out of their play, and Sophia watched with fascination as Emma navigated these social interactions with confidence and kindness. "She's new," Emma explained, when a shy girl around her age hovered at the edge of their construction project. "Want to help us build the roof? We need someone with small fingers to weave the grass together." Within minutes, the shy girl was fully integrated into their project, her earlier hesitation forgotten in the face of Emma's easy acceptance. This was what Richard had never understood, Sophia realized. The way children approached relationships, with openness instead of calculation, with genuine interest instead of social positioning. Emma didn't care about the other girl's clothes or her family's status or whether she had anything to offer in return. She simply saw another person and extended friendship. "You're really good with kids," the shy girl's mother commented as they watched their daughters collaborate on the fairy house. "Do you have children of your own?" "No," Sophia replied. "I'm just visiting." But even as she said it, she wondered if that was entirely true. Was she visiting, or was she discovering something she'd been searching for without realizing it? They returned to the apartment for lunch, where Emma demonstrated her sandwich-making skills and regaled Sophia with stories about her school friends, her favorite teacher, and her elaborate plans for her 9th birthday, which was still several months away, but apparently required extensive advance planning. "I want to have a party where everyone can paint pictures," Emma explained, as she carefully arranged apple slices on her plate. "Not like copying something, but just painting whatever makes them happy. Daddy says that's the best kind of art." "That sounds like a wonderful party," Sophia agreed, thinking of her own abandoned paintings, the creative joy she'd sacrificed in the name of sophistication. "You could come to my party if you want. I know it's not for a really long time, but maybe you'll still be friends with us by then." The casual assumption that their friendship would extend months into the future touched something deep in Sophia's chest. When was the last time someone had simply assumed she would remain part of their life? When was the last time she'd wanted to? "I would love to come to your party, Emma." After lunch, they settled on the couch together, Emma curled up against Sophia's, sighed as she read aloud from one of her favorite books. The simple intimacy of the moment, the weight of the child against her shoulder, the rhythm of turning pages, the comfortable silence between chapters, felt like something Sophia had been missing without knowing it. "Sophia," Emma said as they reached the end of the story, "Are you sad about not getting married yesterday?" Sophia considered the question, surprised to realize that she felt lighter today than she had in months. The panic and desperation of the previous evening had been replaced by something calmer, more purposeful. "No," she said honestly. "I think I'm relieved." "Good. Daddy says you should never stay in places that make you feel small, even if they look nice from the outside." "Your dad is a wise man." "Yeah, he is. He learned it from being sad for a while after my mom left, but then he figured out that being sad wasn't helping anybody, so he decided to focus on making our life as good as it could be instead. Emma's matter-of-fact delivery of this profound observation left Sophia momentarily speechless. Here was an 8-year-old child who understood concepts about resilience and choice that many adults never grasped. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Sure. What do you think makes someone a good parent?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question with the seriousness she brought to all important discussions. "I think good parents pay attention to who you really are instead of trying to make you into somebody else," she said finally. "And they answer your questions even when they're weird questions, and they hug you when you're sad, but they don't try to fix everything for you, because sometimes you need to figure things out yourself." Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes, thinking of her own parents and their relentless focus on appearances, their disappointment whenever she failed to meet their expectations of what a proper daughter should be. "Those are very good answers," she managed. "Do you want kids someday?" Emma asked. I think I do. I never really let myself think about it seriously before, but yes, I think I would like to have children." "You'd be a good mom. You listen to people and you're not afraid to get your hands dirty, and you make really good pancakes." Before Sophia could respond to this assessment, they heard James's key in the lock. Emma jumped up from the couch, running, to greet her father with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been separated for days rather than hours. "Daddy, we had the best day. We built a fairy house and I taught Sophia how to feed Captain Bubbles, and she read me 3 whole chapters, and she said she wants to come to my birthday party." James caught his daughter in a hug, looking over her head at Sophia with an expression of gratitude and something deeper that she couldn't quite identify. "Sounds like you two had quite an adventure," he said. "The best adventure," Emma confirmed. "Sophia's really good at adventures. She's not afraid of bugs, and she knows how to braid grass, and she thinks my ideas are interesting instead of silly." "Your ideas are interesting," James said seriously. "They always have been." As Emma launched into a detailed recap of their day, Sophia watched the easy affection between father and daughter, the way James listened to every word, as if Emma's playground adventures were the most important news he'd heard all week. This was what love looked like, she realized. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but attention and presence, and the willingness to see another person clearly. "How was work?" Sophia asked when Emma paused for breath. "Productive. We got the parts ordered and the preliminary work done. Should be able to finish the whole job Monday morning." James studied her face, noting something different about her expression. "You look rested." "I feel rested. More rested than I've felt in a long time, actually." "That's because you had a good day," Emma announced with authority. "Good days make you feel rested even when you don't sleep very much." As the afternoon moved toward evening, Sophia found herself reluctant to think about what came next. She knew she couldn't stay on James's couch indefinitely, couldn't continue to avoid the practical realities of rebuilding her life. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with people who saw her as she truly was, rather than as they needed her to be. And as she watched James help Emma with a puzzle while dinner simmered on the stove, she began to understand what he had seen in her that Richard never could. Not a decorative accessory or a status symbol, but a person with her own thoughts and dreams and capacity for love. Someone worth knowing, not just possessing. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, opening up possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. For the first time in her adult life, the future felt like something she could actively choose, rather than something that simply happened to her. Sunday morning arrived with the gentle chaos that seemed to define life in the Mitchell household. Emma had apparently decided that pancakes were now a weekend tradition, and she woke both adults before 7 o'clock with enthusiastic announcements about her plans to improve upon yesterday's breakfast success. "I think we should add blueberries this time," she declared, standing beside the couch where Sophia was still struggling to orient herself in the early morning light. "And maybe chocolate chips. Daddy says fruit and chocolate cover all the important food groups." "I'm pretty sure that's not exactly what I said." James's voice came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of coffee being prepared with the urgent efficiency of someone who wasn't fully functional before caffeine. Sophia sat up, acutely aware that she was still wearing the same clothes she'd arrived in 2 days ago. The wedding dress had served as makeshift pajamas, but it was becoming increasingly clear that she needed to address some practical concerns about her situation. "James," she said as she joined him in the kitchen, "I should probably figure out how to get some of my things today. I can't keep wearing this dress forever." James looked up from measuring coffee grounds, taking in her appearance with new eyes. Somehow, the elaborate gown looked less tragic and more incongruous each day she wore it, like a costume that no longer fit the person inside it. "Do you want to call your Richard? Set up a time to collect your belongings?" The suggestion made Sophia's stomach clench with anxiety. She hadn't spoken to Richard since walking out of the church, hadn't even turned on her phone to see what messages might be waiting for her. The thought of facing him, of explaining her decision, of dealing with his anger and her parents' disappointment felt overwhelming. "I'm not ready for that conversation yet," she admitted. "What about a friend, someone who could get your things for you?" Sophia considered this, mentally reviewing her social circle. Most of her friends were also Richard's friends, connected to his business or social world. The few relationships that predated Richard had withered during the years she'd spent molding herself into the perfect fiancé. "There might be someone," she said slowly. "My friend Lisa from college. We've kept in touch sporadically, and she never really approved of Richard anyway. Want to borrow my phone to call her?" Sophia realized that she'd been unconsciously avoiding any contact with her old life, as if ignoring it might make it disappear entirely. But Emma's casual questions about the future had made her understand that she couldn't hide forever. If she was going to build something new, she first had to deal with what she was leaving behind. "Actually, I should probably turn on my own phone, face whatever's waiting for me." James nodded, understanding the magnitude of this decision. "Want some moral support while you do it?" "That would be nice." They settled at the kitchen table while Emma entertained herself by drawing elaborate plans for the day's pancake creation. Sophia's phone had been turned off since Saturday afternoon, and as it powered up, it immediately began buzzing with notifications. Dozens of missed calls, text messages, voicemails, a digital avalanche of concern, confusion, and anger. 37 missed calls from Richard, Sophia reported, scrolling through the notifications with growing dread. 12 from my mother, 8 from the wedding planner, and, oh God, apparently someone called the police because they thought something terrible had happened to me. James winced sympathetically. "That's a lot to process. Listen to this text from my mother. Sophia Marie Chen, you will call me immediately and explain this humiliation you have brought upon our family. The Westfields are devastated, and your father's business relationships are in jeopardy." Sophia looked up from her phone. Not, "Are you safe?" or "We're worried about you." Just, "Concern about social embarrassment and business relationships." "I'm sorry," James said simply. "The thing is, I'm not even surprised. This is exactly how I knew they would react." Sophia continued scrolling through messages. Here's one from Richard. "Sophia, whatever temporary insanity caused this breakdown, we can work through it. The marriage can be rescheduled once you've gotten the help you clearly need." She showed James the message, noting his expression of distaste at the condescending tone. "He thinks this was a mental health crisis," she continued. not a rational decision made by an adult woman who realized she was about to make a terrible mistake. Emma looked up from her drawing, apparently tuned in to the conversation, despite her apparent focus on her artwork. "What's a mental health crisis?" she asked with genuine curiosity. James and Sophia exchanged glances, both wondering how to explain adult relationship dysfunction to an 8-year-old. Sometimes adults use that phrase when they don't want to listen to what someone is actually saying, James explained carefully. Instead of trying to understand why someone is upset, they decide the person must be sick. "That's not very nice," Emma observed. "No, it's not," Sophia agreed. Among the chaos of messages, Sophia found several from Lisa Morrison, her college roommate, and one of the few people who had consistently questioned her relationship with Richard. "Soph, saw the news about the wedding. Are you okay? Call me when you can. I'm worried but also kind of proud of you." "Found someone who might actually be helpful," Sophia said, showing James the message. She dialed Lisa's number, her hands slightly shaky as she waited for her friend to answer. "Sophia, thank God. I've been worried sick since I heard. Are you safe? Where are you?" "I'm safe," Sophia said, surprised by how good it felt to hear genuine concern in someone's voice. "I'm staying with a friend." "Good. I was afraid. You might try to deal with this alone." Lisa's voice was warm with relief. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected, actually." "Lisa, I need a favor. Anything. I need someone to get my things from Richard's apartment. I can't face going there myself right now, and I can't keep wearing the same clothes forever. Of course, I can do that today if you want. Do you have a key, or should I coordinate with Richard?" Sophia realized she'd been carrying her purse and keys with her when she fled the church. Muscle memory from years of social events where losing track of your belongings was a cardinal sin. "I have keys, but Lisa, there's going to be drama. My family, Richard, everyone is going to want answers I'm not ready to give." "Let me worry about that. I've been waiting years for an excuse to tell Richard exactly what I think of him." Lisa's voice held a note of satisfaction that made Sophia smile for the first time since turning on her phone. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near Richard's apartment, where Sophia could give Lisa her keys and a list of essential items. As she ended the call, Sophia felt a mixture of relief and anxiety about re-engaging with her old life, even at arm's length. "Feel better?" James asked. "Terrified but functional," Sophia replied, "which I think counts as progress." "Can we make pancakes now?" Emma interjected, apparently having reached the limit of her patience with adult complications. "All this talking is making me hungry, and Captain Bubbles keeps looking at me like he's judging my breakfast choices." The morning routine of cooking together had become surprisingly natural, with Emma directing operations, while James and Sophia handled the more complex tasks. As they worked, Sophia found herself marveling at how different this felt from the elaborate brunches she'd attended with Richard's social circle. No stress about appearances or conversations, no underlying tension about saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. "Sophia," Emma said as she carefully distributed blueberries into the pancake batter, "are you going to live with us forever?" The question hung in the air, innocent, but loaded with implications that made both adults pause in their preparations. "I don't know, sweetie," Sophia said honestly. "I need to figure out what comes next for me. But you like it here, right? I can tell because you smile more than you did when you first came, and you don't look scared anymore." Sophia considered this assessment, surprised by its accuracy. She did feel more relaxed, more like herself than she had in years, but she also understood that she couldn't make decisions about her future based on a few days of refuge from reality. "I do like it here," she said carefully. "Very much, but sometimes liking something and being able to stay there are different things." Emma nodded with the philosophical acceptance that children often brought to adult complexities they didn't fully understand. Well, if you do have to go somewhere else, you should come visit us a lot. And maybe we could visit you too if you wanted. I would love that, Sophia said, meaning it completely. After breakfast, James suggested they all go together to meet Lisa, making it clear that Sophia didn't have to face this transition alone. The coffee shop Lisa had chosen was in a trendy part of downtown that Sophia recognized from her old life, the kind of place where people went to see and be seen, where conversations were conducted with one eye on who else might be listening. Lisa was already waiting when they arrived, her red hair unmistakable even from across the crowded cafe. She stood up as they approached, enveloping Sophia in a hug that lasted longer than social convention typically allowed. "You look good," Lisa said, stepping back to study her friend's face. "Different, but good. More like the Sophia I remember. From college. I feel more like myself than I have in years," Sophia admitted. Lisa's attention turned to James and Emma, her expression curious but warm. Sophia made quick introductions, noting how Lisa's eyebrows rose slightly when she learned that James was the friend who had taken Sophia in. "Nice to meet you," Lisa said to James, with the assessing look of someone evaluating her friend's judgment. "Thank you for taking care of her." "She's been taking care of us as much as we've been taking care of her," James replied, his hand coming to rest protectively on Emma's shoulder. While James and Emma settled at a nearby table with hot chocolate and coloring books that the cafe provided for young customers, Sophia and Lisa found a corner where they could talk privately. "Okay," Lisa said without preamble, "I need the full story. Last time we talked you were stressed about wedding planning but seemed resigned to going through with it. What changed?" Sophia found herself telling the story from the beginning, the growing sense of disconnection from her own life, the moment in the bridal suite when she'd realized she felt nothing, the impulse to run that had led her to James and Emma. "And you've been staying with him since Saturday?" Lisa asked, glancing over at James, who was helping Emma solve what appeared to be a complicated coloring challenge. "I know how it sounds," Sophia said quickly. "But Lisa, it's not what you're thinking. He's not some rebound romance or escape, a fantasy. He's real. He sees me as a person instead of an accessory." Lisa studied her friend's face, noting the animation and energy that had been missing from Sophia's expression for years. "You're falling for him," she observed. "I don't know," Sophia said, though her protest lacked conviction. "Maybe. But that's not the point. The point is that being around him and Emma has reminded me of who I used to be, who I still could be." "And who is that?" "Someone who has her own opinions. Someone who enjoys simple things like making pancakes and reading stories and having conversations that aren't about social positioning or business networking." Sophia's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "Someone who might want to teach children, or paint pictures or build a life based on what makes her happy, instead of what looks impressive from the outside." Lisa smiled, the first genuinely pleased expression Sophia had seen from her in years. "There's the Sophia I remember from freshman. Yeah, the one who stayed up all night working on art projects and spent her weekends volunteering at the children's hospital." "I'd forgotten about that," Sophia said softly. "The volunteering. I loved those kids, loved seeing them get excited about tiny things like stickers and silly jokes." "Richard made you forget a lot of things," Lisa said with characteristic bluntness. "I watched you disappear bit by bit into his version of who you should be. It was heartbreaking." They spent another hour talking through practical concerns, what belongings Sophia would need immediately, how to handle questions from family and friends, whether she wanted Lisa to attempt any damage control with her parents. "Don't bother trying to explain anything to my mother," Sophia said finally. "She won't understand the decision, and she'll see any attempt to justify it as further evidence that I've lost my mind." "What about financially? Do you have access to your own money?" This was a concern that Sophia had been avoiding thinking about. During her engagement, she'd gradually allowed Richard to take over more and more of her financial affairs, claiming it was practice for when they were married. Her own savings. Account had dwindled as she'd stopped working and started depending on Richard's generosity for everything from clothing to groceries. "I have some money saved, but not much. Certainly not enough to live independently for very long." "Then you'll need to figure out work. What do you want to do?" Sophia thought about Emma's enthusiasm for learning, about the natural way she'd fallen into explaining things and answering questions, about her forgotten love of art and her long-abandoned dream of teaching. "I think I want to go back to school," she said slowly. "Get my teaching credential. Start over properly this time, building a life based on what I actually want instead of what other people expect. That's going to take time and money you don't currently have." "I know. But maybe there are ways to work toward it gradually." Substitute. Teaching, tutoring, volunteering with children's programs, building experience while I figure out the financial logistics. Lisa nodded approvingly. "Now you sound like someone with a plan instead of someone running away from one." As they prepared to part ways, Lisa collecting Sophia's keys and detailed instructions about which belongings were most important, Sophia felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation about this next step. "Lisa," she said, as her friend prepared to leave, "thank you for understanding, for helping, for being the kind of friend who tells me the truth even when it's complicated." "That's what friends do," Lisa replied simply. "And Sophia, I think you're making the right choice, all of them, leaving Richard, staying with James, deciding to build something new instead of trying to fix something that was never right to begin with." After Lisa left, Sophia rejoined James and Emma, who had progressed from coloring to an elaborate game involving napkin sculptures and detailed backstories for each creation. "Everything okay?" James asked, noting the thoughtful expression on her face. "Getting there," Sophia replied, "taking it one step at a time." "That's all anyone can do," he said simply. As they walked back to the apartment, Emma chattering about plans for the afternoon, Sophia reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. She was still wearing a wedding dress that belonged to someone else's dream, still facing an uncertain future with limited resources and complicated family relationships. But for the first time in years, the uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. For the first time in her adult life, she was making choices based on her own values rather than other people's expectations. And as she watched James listen patiently to Emma's elaborate plans for teaching Captain Bubbles to recognize different types of music, she began to understand that what he saw in her wasn't just who she could become, but who she had always been underneath the layers of social conditioning and self-doubt. The question now was whether she was brave enough to trust that vision of herself, and whether she was willing to do the hard work of building a life that honored it. Monday morning brought the first real test of the delicate balance that had developed in the Mitchell household. James had to return to work, Emma had school, and Sophia was left alone with her thoughts and the practical realities of rebuilding a life from scratch. Lisa had delivered 3 suitcases of belongings the night before, along with a detailed report of her encounter with Richard that had left Sophia feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. According to Lisa, Richard had been shocked by her appearance at the apartment, demanding to know where Sophia was hiding and insisting that she was having some sort of breakdown that required professional intervention. He kept saying that you just needed time to come to your senses, Lisa had reported with obvious disgust, as if choosing not to marry him was evidence of mental illness rather than good judgment. Now, wearing her own clothes for the first time in 3 days, a simple pair of jeans and a soft blue sweater that felt like a revelation after the wedding dress, Sophia sat at James's kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook, trying to create some semblance of a plan. The financial reality was sobering. She had about $3,000 in her personal savings account, enough to survive for perhaps 6 weeks if she was extremely careful. Richard had controlled most of their shared expenses, and she realized with growing alarm how completely she had allowed herself to become financially dependent on someone else. Her phone buzzed with another call from her mother, the 10th since yesterday. Sophia had been letting them go to voicemail, but the messages were becoming increasingly frantic and guilt-inducing. Finally, she steeled herself and answered, "Sophia Marie, thank God. We need to talk immediately." "Hello, Mother," Sophia said, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. "Don't you hello mother me. Do you have any idea what you've done? The humiliation you've caused our entire family? The Westfields are threatening to withdraw their investment in your father's company, and the gossip has already spread through the entire social circle." Sophia took a deep breath, remembering Emma's observations about adults who cared more about appearances than feelings. "I'm sorry about the social complications, but I made the right decision for me." "The right decision?" "Sophia, you walked out on one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. Richard is successful, handsome, from a good family. What more could you possibly want?" "I could want someone who actually knows who I am," Sophia replied quietly. "Someone who cares about my thoughts and feelings, not just how I look on his arm at business dinners. That's ridiculous romantic nonsense. Marriage is a partnership, a joining of families and resources. Love grows from mutual respect and shared goals." "Then why didn't I feel any of that with Richard?" Her mother was silent for a moment, clearly unprepared for direct questions about emotional reality. "You're being selfish, Sophia, and foolish. Where are you even staying?" Lisa refused to tell us anything except that you were safe. "I'm staying with friends who actually care about my well-being instead of their social standing. Come home immediately. We'll have the family doctor examine you, and then we can discuss salvaging this situation with the Westfields." The casual assumption that she needed medical evaluation for making an independent decision crystallized something in Sophia's mind. This was exactly the kind of treatment that had made her feel invisible in her own life. "I'm not coming home, Mother. I'm 26 years old, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my life. If you continue with this ridiculous behavior, don't expect your father and me to support you financially." "I wouldn't dream of asking," Sophia replied, surprised by how much strength she felt in that statement. "I'm going to support myself. With what skills? Doing what work? You've never held a real job in your life." The criticism stung because it contained enough truth to hurt. But instead of crushing her confidence, it sparked something defiant in Sophia's chest. "Then I guess it's time I learned." She ended the call before her mother could respond, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation. But underneath the anxiety, she felt something else, a sense of liberation that came from finally stating her position clearly. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet without Emma's chatter and James's steady presence. Sophia wandered from room to room, noting details she'd been too overwhelmed to register before. The refrigerator is covered with Emma's artwork and school papers. The bookshelf filled with an eclectic mix of children's books, automotive manuals, and worn paperback novels. The small desk in the corner of the living room, where James apparently paid bills and helped Emma with homework. It was a life built around function rather than appearance, around genuine connection rather than social impression. Everything served a purpose, contributing to the daily rhythms of two people who genuinely cared about each other's happiness. Her phone rang again, this time showing Richard's number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Sophia, we need to talk. This has gone on long enough." "Hello, Richard. I'm willing to overlook this episode if you come to your senses now. We can tell people you had pre-wedding nerves, needed a few days to clear your head. The damage can be contained if we act quickly. I don't want the damage contained. I want out of this relationship. That's not rational. We're perfect together. Everyone says so. We have the same background, the same social circle, compatible life goals. No, Richard, you have life goals, and I've been going along with them. There's a difference. This is about that ridiculous painting phase you went through in college, isn't it? Sophia, you can't build a life around hobby interests. You need stability, security, a proper social position. The dismissive way he referred to her art as a phase rather than a genuine passion reminded Sophia exactly why she'd felt so empty during their engagement. What I need is to feel like myself, in my own life. You're not making sense. Look, whatever fantasy you're chasing, it's not sustainable. Come back, we'll get married quietly next month, and we can put this whole embarrassing incident behind us. I'm not coming back, Richard. I don't want to marry you. I don't think I ever really did. I just thought I was supposed to. This is insane. You're throwing away everything we've built together. What exactly have we built? A relationship where you make all the decisions and I smile and nod? A life where I'm not allowed to have opinions that differ from yours? You're being dramatic. I've always supported your interests. You threw away my paintings. They were amateur work. I was helping you develop more sophisticated tastes. They were mine. They mattered to me, and you destroyed them without asking. Richard was quiet for a moment, apparently recognizing that this particular grievance was harder to dismiss. Fine. If art is so important to you, take classes. Join a gallery board. There are ways to pursue cultural interests that complement, rather than competing with our social obligations. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about my passions like they're decorative accessories. I'm talking about being realistic. Sophia, you can't survive on your own. You have no work experience, no practical skills. You need me. The words hit exactly where they were intended to, targeting her deepest fears about her ability to build an independent life. But instead of crumbling under their weight, Sophia found herself thinking about Emma's matter-of-fact confidence, about James's quiet strength in facing challenges alone. Maybe you're right, she said slowly. Maybe I don't have practical skills yet, but I can learn them, and I'd rather struggle to build something authentic than live comfortably in someone else's vision of my life. This is temporary madness. You'll realize your mistake within a month and come crawling back. No, Richard, I won't. She ended the call and immediately turned off her phone, needing silence to process the emotional weight of these confrontations. Both conversations had clarified something important. She wasn't just leaving a relationship or disappointing her family. She was choosing to become someone new, someone who valued her own voice over other people's approval. The sound of a key in the lock interrupted her brooding. Emma burst through the door with typical 8-year-old energy, backpack flying as she launched into an immediate recap of her school day. "Sophia, you're here. I thought maybe you might be gone when I got home, but Daddy said you would probably still be here, and I told him that I hoped so, because I wanted to show you the story. I wrote about our fairy house." James followed more quietly, carrying grocery bags and wearing the slightly tired expression of someone who'd spent the day dealing with mechanical problems and customer complaints. "How was your day?" he asked Sophia, noting something different in her expression. "Challenging but clarifying," she replied. "I spoke to my mother and Richard, made some things official." Emma had spread her school papers across the coffee table and was sorting through them with intense concentration. "Found it!" "Look, Sophia, this is the story about Princess Willowbark who lived in the fairy house we built." Mrs. Rodriguez said it was very creative and asked if I wanted to read it to the whole class. Sophia moved to sit beside Emma, genuinely interested in the elaborate tale that involved magical gardens and talking animals, and a princess who solved problems through kindness rather than magic spells. "This is wonderful, Emma. You're a gifted storyteller. Daddy helped me with some of the spelling, but all the ideas are mine. Do you want to help me draw pictures to go with it? As they worked on illustrations together, James prepared dinner and filled Sophia in on his day at the garage. There was something deeply comforting about this routine, the way they all seemed to fit naturally into domestic rhythms that felt sustainable rather than performed. "Sophia," Emma said as she carefully colored a fairy's wings, "did you figure out what you're going to do for work?" "I'm still working on that, sweetie. It's a little complicated." "Well, you could be a teacher. You're really good at explaining things, and you don't get impatient when people ask lots of questions." "I've been thinking about teaching, actually." "What grade would you want to teach? Because if you taught second or third grade, you could have me in your class when I get older." The casual assumption that Sophia would still be part of their lives, years in the future, touched something deep in her chest. Emma spoke as if their connection was permanent, as if the possibility of Sophia disappearing was simply not worth considering. "I think I'd like to teach elementary school," Sophia said. "Maybe kindergarten or first grade, when kids are just learning to read and everything is exciting and new." "That would be perfect for you," Emma declared with authority. "Little kids would love you because you pay attention to what they're actually saying instead of just pretending to listen." During dinner, Sophia shared her decision to pursue teaching, explaining the practical steps she'd need to take: finding work to support herself while going back to school, getting her credential, gaining classroom experience. "There's a substitute teaching program through the district," James offered. "They're always looking for qualified people, and it would give you experience in different schools and grade levels." "I looked into that today, actually. I can get emergency substitute certification with my degree and then work toward my full credential. It's not much money, but it's a start." "Every start has to begin somewhere," Emma said solemnly, apparently quoting something she'd heard adults say. After Emma went to bed, James and Sophia settled into what had become their evening routine of quiet conversation and shared cleanup duties. But tonight felt different, charged with the awareness that decisions had been made and paths chosen. "How do you feel about burning all those bridges today?" James asked as they finished washing dishes. "Scared but relieved," Sophia admitted. "Like I finally stopped pretending that I could fix something that was fundamentally wrong." "Richard, and your parents, do you think they'll come around eventually?" Sophia considered this, thinking about her mother's focus on social embarrassment and Richard's assumption that her desires were temporary madness. "My parents might, once they realize I'm serious and not coming back. But they'll never really understand the choice, and Richard—" She shook her head. "Richard genuinely believes that his vision of our life together was objectively correct, and that my disagreement is evidence of poor judgment rather than different values." "That must be lonely, being in a relationship with someone who doesn't see you as a separate person with valid opinions." "It was. I just didn't let myself acknowledge how lonely until I experienced what it felt like to be truly seen." James looked at her with surprise at the directness of this statement. "When you talked to Emma today or helped her with her story, you never tried to redirect her interest towards something more practical or appropriate," Sophia continued. "You celebrated her creativity and helped her develop it. That's what it looks like when someone sees another person clearly. Emma makes it easy. She knows who she is and what she likes. I just try not to get in the way of that." "But that's exactly what I mean. You respect her autonomy, even though she's 8 years old. Richard couldn't respect mine, even though I'm a grown woman." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of this recognition settling between them. "Sophia," James said carefully, "I don't want you to feel like you have to stay here just because you don't have anywhere else to go. I mean, you're welcome to stay as long as you need to, but I don't want you to feel trapped by circumstances." "Is that what you think, that I'm here because I have no other options?" I think you're in a vulnerable place, and I don't want to take advantage of that. You should make decisions about your future based on what you actually want, not what feels safe or convenient right now. Sophia studied his face, noting the careful way he was trying to give her space to choose freely rather than feeling obligated. By his kindness, "James, do you remember what you said that first night about trusting your instincts instead of doing what you think you're supposed to do?" He nodded. "My instinct is telling me that this, being here with you and Emma, is the first right thing I've done in years. Not because it's safe or convenient, but because it feels authentic in a way nothing else has. Even though we've only known each other for 4 days, especially because of that. In 4 days, you've seen more of who I really am than Richard saw in 3 years. That means something." James was quiet for a long moment, processing this declaration and its implications. "So what happens now?" he asked finally. "Now I figure out how to build a life that honors what I've learned about myself. I get my substitute teaching certification. I find a small apartment nearby. I start over properly this time. Nearby? Well, I can't very well disappear from Emma's life now that she's made plans for me to attend her birthday party. And someone needs to make sure you don't burn any more pancakes." James smiled, the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him since that first night in the diner. "Emma's going to be thrilled. She's been worried about you leaving." "What? About you? How do you feel about me staying in the area?" "Terrified and hopeful," he said honestly. "Terrified because caring about someone new feels risky after everything with Jessica. Hopeful because—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Because for the first time in years, I can imagine what it might be like to share this life with someone who actually wants to be part of it." Sophia reached across the small space between them and took his hand, noting how perfectly it fit in hers. "I want to be part of it," she said simply. "Not because I need rescuing, but because I choose it. Because you and Emma have shown me what love actually looks like when it's based on seeing and accepting someone as they really are." As they sat together in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on genuine connection rather than social expectation, Sophia understood that she was finally becoming the person she was meant to be. Not the decorative wife her parents had envisioned, not the perfect society woman Richard had wanted to possess, but someone who valued authenticity over appearance, someone brave enough to choose love over security, someone willing to build a future based on what mattered rather than what looked impressive from the outside. The wedding dress hanging in the closet seemed like a relic from someone else's life, a costume that no longer fit the woman she was becoming. Tomorrow, she would take the first practical steps toward independence and a career that honored her values. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, with people who saw her clearly and chose to love what they found there. 3 weeks later, Sophia stood in front of Lincoln Elementary School at 7:30 in the morning, holding a folder of lesson plans and trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. This was her first full-day substitute assignment, covering for a second-grade teacher who had come down with the flu, and she was determined to prove that her decision to pursue teaching was more than just romantic idealism. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of practical arrangements and small victories. She'd found a tiny studio apartment 6 blocks from James's place, close enough for Emma to visit easily, but far enough to maintain the independence that felt crucial to building something healthy and sustainable. The apartment was barely larger than a hotel room, with a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and a mini-fridge, but it was hers. She'd furnished it with items from thrift stores and garage sales, creating a space that felt more authentically her own than the expensive apartment she'd shared with Richard. More importantly, she'd passed her emergency substitute certification exam and registered with the district's substitute teaching program. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover her basic expenses, but each day in a classroom reinforced her conviction that this was the right path. "You're going to be wonderful," James had told her that morning as she'd practiced explaining fractions using Emma's collection of toy dinosaurs. Those kids are lucky to have someone who actually remembers what it was like to be their age. Now, walking down the hallway toward classroom 2B, Sophia tried to channel the confidence that Emma had shown when demonstrating proper fairy house construction techniques. Children, she'd learned, responded to authenticity more than authority, to genuine interest more than professional polish. The classroom was already buzzing with energy when she arrived. 22 second graders were engaged in various preschool activities, reading quietly, organizing their backpacks, feeding the class hamster, and conducting what appeared to be a complex negotiation about trading snacks. "Are you our new teacher?" a girl with elaborate braids asked immediately. "Because Mrs. Peterson said we were getting a substitute, but sometimes substitutes don't know anything about our routines, and everything gets weird." "I'm Ms. Chen, and I'm here to learn about your routines so everything can stay as normal as—" "Impossible," Sophia replied, appreciating the child's directness. "What's the most important thing I should know about how your class works?" Several hands shot up immediately, and Sophia found herself receiving detailed briefings about everything from the proper way to line up for lunch to the complicated hierarchy of classroom jobs that apparently required diplomatic precision to manage fairly. And Benny sometimes gets overwhelmed and needs to sit in the quiet corner with the stuffed animals, a boy named Marcus explained seriously. "But that doesn't mean he's in trouble. It just means his feelings got too big for regular sitting." Sophia looked over at Benny, a small boy with glasses who was methodically arranging colored pencils in rainbow order, and felt a surge of affection for Mrs. Peterson's obvious understanding of different children's needs. "That sounds like a very good system," she said. "Feelings do get too big sometimes." The morning proceeded more smoothly than Sophia had dared hope. These children were eager to share their knowledge, patient with her questions about their procedures, and surprisingly invested in helping her succeed. When she accidentally called recess 15 minutes early, they politely informed her of the error and suggested they use the extra time for an additional story. "You're really good at the voices," a girl named Ashley observed as Sophia finished, reading a picture book about a mouse who wanted to be an artist. "Mrs. Peterson does voices too, but yours are different, more like how the characters would really sound." During lunch, Sophia sat with a small group of children who had chosen to eat in the classroom rather than the cafeteria. The conversation ranged from dinosaur facts to family pets to elaborate theories about why adults needed coffee to function properly. "My dad drinks a lot of coffee," a boy named Tyler mentioned, "especially since my mum moved to Florida. He says it helps him think better, but I think he just likes having something warm to hold." The casual way Tyler mentioned his parents' separation reminded Sophia of Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of her mother's absence. Children, she was learning, were often more resilient and perceptive than adults gave them credit for. "Coffee can be comforting," she agreed. "Sometimes holding something warm makes difficult things feel a little easier." "Do you have kids, Miss Chen?" Ashley asked. "No, but I have a friend who's 8 years old, and she's taught me a lot about how smart and interesting kids can be." "What's her name?" "Emma. She's very good at building fairy houses and asking important questions." "I like asking important questions too," Tyler said. "Like, why do we have to learn cursive when everyone just types on computers anyway?" "That is an important question. What do you think the answer might be?" The afternoon flew by in a blur of math games, art projects, and the kind of authentic conversations that reminded Sophia why she'd been drawn to teaching in the first place. These children weren't miniature adults to be managed and directed. They were complete people with their own perspectives and insights, deserving of respect and genuine engagement. When the final bell rang and the last child had been collected by parents or loaded onto buses, Sophia sat alone in the quiet classroom, reflecting on the day. She was exhausted but energized, drained by the constant attention required, but filled with a sense of purpose she'd never experienced in her previous life. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "How was your first day? As a real teacher? Incredible and terrifying and perfect," she replied. "Tell Emma that second graders are just as smart as she said they would be." The response came quickly. "She says she told you so, and she wants to know if you learned anything new about fairy house construction from your students." Sophia smiled, gathering her things and heading toward the parking lot. She'd bought a used Honda Civic with some of her remaining savings. Nothing like the luxury car she'd driven while engaged to Richard, but reliable and entirely her own. The drive back to her apartment took her past James's complex, and on impulse she stopped to share the day's victories with the two people who had believed in her ability to succeed before she'd believed in it herself. Emma opened the door before Sophia could knock, apparently having been watching for her arrival. "Sophia, Daddy said you had your first real teaching day. Was it amazing? Did anyone cry? Did you have to use your teacher voice?" "I practiced my teacher voice in the mirror this morning in case you needed tips." "It was amazing," Sophia confirmed, scooping Emma into a hug. "And I only had to use my teacher voice twice, both times, to prevent crayon-related conflicts." James appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron that read "Dad Fuel" and holding a wooden spoon. "How do you feel about celebrating your successful debut with spaghetti and meatballs?" Emma insisted we needed a special dinner to mark the occasion. "I would love that." As they cooked together, Sophia found herself recounting the day's highlights, the children's questions, their creative solutions to problems. The moment when a struggling reader successfully made it through an entire paragraph and looked up with shining eyes. "You sound like you were born to do this," James observed, watching her animated descriptions of her students' personalities and achievements. "I felt like myself in a way I haven't in years," Sophia admitted. "Even when things went wrong, even when I had no idea what I was doing, it felt right." Emma, who had been quietly setting the table while listening to their conversation, looked up with sudden seriousness. "Sophia, are you going to keep being a teacher forever? Because I think you should. You get the same happy face that Daddy gets when he fixes cars that nobody else can figure out." The comparison struck Sophia as particularly apt. She had seen James's expression when he successfully diagnosed a difficult mechanical problem, the satisfaction that came from using his skills to solve puzzles and help people. Today had given her a taste of that same fulfillment. Over dinner, Emma peppered Sophia with questions about classroom management, student behavior, and whether any of her second graders were as good at building fairy houses as she was. Her genuine interest in the details of teaching impressed both adults. This wasn't polite conversation, but real curiosity about work that mattered. "Emma," James said as they cleared the dinner dishes, "why don't you show Sophia the surprise you've been working on while I finish cleaning up?" Emma's face lit up with excitement as she disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a carefully wrapped package that she presented to Sophia with ceremonial solemnity. "It's for your first day of being a real teacher," she explained. "I made it myself, with only a little help from Daddy for the hard parts." Sophia unwrapped the gift to reveal a hand-painted picture frame decorated with tiny flowers and stars, containing a drawing of 3 stick figures standing together in front of what appeared to be a school building. The figures were labeled Sophia, Daddy, and Emma in Emma's careful printing. "It's our family," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "I thought you might want to put it on your desk at school so your students know you have people who love you." The casual use of the word family hit Sophia harder than she'd expected. In 3 weeks, this child had seamlessly integrated her into their lives, claiming her as permanent rather than temporary, assuming a future together that felt both natural and miraculous. "Emma, this is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she said, meaning it completely. "Really better than expensive jewelry, much better. Because you made it yourself, and because it shows me something I care about much more than jewelry." "What's that?" "That I belong somewhere, that I'm part of something important." Emma beamed with satisfaction, apparently pleased that her artistic vision had successfully conveyed its intended message. Later, after Emma had gone to bed and James and Sophia had settled into their familiar evening routine of quiet conversation, James brought up something that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about building a life that honors what you've learned about yourself." "What about it?" "I think you're doing something really brave. Not just leaving Richard, but choosing to start over, completely, rather than trying to find another version of the same kind of life." Sophia considered this, thinking about the friends from her old social circle who had married for security or status, who had built lives around external validation rather than internal fulfillment. "It doesn't feel brave. It feels like the only your choice that made sense once I understood what the alternatives actually were. That's what makes it brave. Recognizing that what looks safe from the outside can be the riskiest choice of all." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on the choices that had brought them to this point. "James," Sophia said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When Jessica left, did you ever think about trying to find someone who could fit into the life you'd already built? Someone who could be Emma's mother and your partner without requiring you to change anything fundamental about yourself?" James was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "For a while, yes. I thought that would be easier. Less risky for Emma, less complicated for me. Find someone who could fill the role that Jessica had vacated. But you didn't. No, because I realized that wasn't fair to anyone. Not to me, not to Emma, and especially not to whoever that hypothetical person would be. You can't build something real by trying to replace what you lost with something that looks similar from the outside. So you chose to be alone instead. I chose to focus on building something authentic with Emma rather than settling for something convenient with someone else. I figured if the right person came along, I'd know, because being with them would feel like expansion rather than replacement." Sophia felt something shift in her chest at these words, understanding that he was talking about more than just his past choices. "And now?" James looked at her directly, his expression serious but warm. "Now I think I understand the difference between someone who wants to join your life and someone who wants you to join theirs. The difference between someone who sees what you've built and wants to add to it versus someone who sees what you've built as a starting point for creating something entirely different. Which am I? You're someone who looked at our life, our small apartment, our simple routines, our quiet evenings, and saw something worth being part of rather than something that needed to be improved or elevated. You're someone who helped Emma with her fairy house project instead of suggesting she should be more interested in activities that would look better on a college application. Sophia laughed softly at this last observation. Richard probably would have had opinions about the educational value of fairy house construction. Exactly. And that's how I know that what we're building together is real, because it's based on accepting and celebrating what actually exists, rather than trying to transform it into something more impressive. As Sophia walked back to her apartment, later that evening, carrying Emma's framed drawing and reflecting on the day's successes, she felt a deep sense of alignment between her choices and her values. The studio apartment was small and sparsely furnished. Her bank account was smaller than it had ever been, and her future was less certain than it had been when every decision was made for her. But for the first time in her adult life, she was building something that belonged entirely to her. A career based on genuine passion, relationships built on mutual respect and authentic affection. A daily routine that honored her actual preferences rather than other people's expectations. The wedding dress still hung in the back of her tiny closet, a reminder of the life she'd almost accepted. But it no longer felt like a symbol of failure or loss. Instead, it reminded her of her courage to choose authenticity over security, love over convenience, possibility over certainty. Tomorrow, she would return to Lincoln Elementary for another day of substitute teaching, continuing to build the experience and credentials she needed for her own classroom. This weekend, she and Emma had plans to visit the art museum downtown, where Sophia hoped to rediscover her own creative interests, while sharing them with someone who still believed that art existed for the pure joy of creation. And next month, she would attend Emma's 9th birthday party, not as a temporary visitor in their lives, but as someone who had chosen to stay, someone who had found her place not by settling for what was offered, but by recognizing what was genuinely valuable when she finally encountered it. As she unlocked her apartment door and placed Emma's drawing on the small table that served as both desk and dining surface, Sophia understood that she had succeeded in becoming exactly what James had seen in her from that first night at the bus stop. Not someone who needed to be rescued, but someone brave enough to rescue herself, someone authentic enough to inspire others to be authentic too, someone willing to choose love based on recognition rather than need. The life she was building might be smaller and simpler than the one she'd left behind, but it was entirely her own, constructed from choices that honored her true self rather than other people's visions of who she should be. And that, she realized, made all the difference in the world. 6 months after that rainy night at the bus stop, Sophia stood in her new classroom, watching 24 first graders work on their Mother's Day cards. She'd been offered a permanent position at Lincoln Elementary after a series of successful long-term substitute assignments, and the reality of having her own students still felt like a dream she was afraid to wake from. "Ms. Chen," a girl named Lily approached with her artwork, "what if you don't have a traditional mom? Can you make a card for someone else who takes care of you?" Sophia smiled, thinking of Emma's birthday party the previous month, where she'd been formally introduced to all of Emma's friends as Sophia, who's basically my bonus mom now. The casual announcement had surprised her, but Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of their unconventional family structure had become the template for how everyone else understood their relationship. "You can absolutely make a card for whoever makes you feel loved and safe," Sophia told Lily. "Families come in all different shapes." As her students worked, Sophia reflected on how much had changed since she'd first walked into a classroom 6 months ago. Teaching had revealed strength she'd never known she possessed: patience with frustrated learners, creativity in explaining complex concepts, and an intuitive understanding of how to help children feel valued for who they were rather than who they were supposed to become. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. James appeared in her classroom doorway during her planning period, holding a small bouquet of flowers from the grocery store and wearing an expression of nervous excitement that made her pulse quicken. "What are you doing here?" she asked, delighted by the surprise. "Emma's at piano lessons, and I wanted to talk to you about something before I lose my nerve." Sophia gestured for him to sit at one of the tiny student desks, amused by the sight of his tall frame, folded into furniture designed for 6-year-olds. "Remember that conversation we had about building something new, instead of trying to recreate what we'd lost?" James began. "Of course. Well, I've been thinking about building something we've never had before, something that honors what we've each learned about ourselves and what we want from life." Sophia felt her heart begin to race, sensing the direction of this conversation, but afraid to assume. "I love you," James said simply. "Not because you saved me or because I saved you, but because you're brave enough to be yourself and generous enough to let Emma and me be ourselves too. You see us clearly and choose us anyway. James, I'm not asking you to marry me," he continued quickly. "Not yet. We're still figuring out who we are together. But I wanted you to know that when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it, permanently, as Emma's bonus mom and my partner, and the person who reminds me that love should feel like coming home to yourself." Sophia felt tears building in her eyes, overwhelmed by the rightness of his words and the patient way he was approaching their future. "I love you too," she said softly, "both of you. More than I thought it was possible to love people I've only known for 6 months. "Emma has a theory about that," James said, smiling. "She says that sometimes people are meant to be family, and when they finally find each other, it doesn't matter how long it takes to make it official." That evening, they shared the news with Emma over dinner at their favorite pizza place. Emma's reaction was characteristically pragmatic. "Does this mean Sophia's going to move in with us? Because her apartment is really small, and she could have the office room if she wants somewhere to paint." "We haven't worked out those details yet," James replied. "What do you think about the idea?" "I think it's about time," Emma said seriously. "You two have been making heart eyes at each other for months. It was getting kind of embarrassing." "Heart eyes," Sophia laughed. "That's when people look at each other like they have a secret that makes them happy. You do it all the time." 6 weeks later, Sophia moved into the Mitchell household officially, bringing her easel and art supplies to transform James's small office into a studio space. The apartment was definitely crowded with 3 people, but it was a good kind of crowded, full of life and laughter, and the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. She'd started painting again, inspired by Emma's fearless approach to creativity and James's quiet encouragement. Her new pieces were different from her college work, bolder, more confident, infused with the joy of someone who had finally learned to trust her own vision. "I have something for you," Emma announced one Saturday morning, presenting Sophia with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a photograph in a simple frame, the 3 of them at Emma's birthday party, laughing at something off-camera. But below the photo, Emma had written in careful letters, "My real family." "I wanted you to have it for your classroom," Emma explained, "so your students know that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose." As Sophia looked at the photograph, she thought about the wedding that never happened, about the life she'd almost settled for, about the moment of courage that had changed everything. She thought about Richard, who had eventually married someone else in an elaborate ceremony that her mother had described in painful detail during one of their increasingly rare phone conversations. But mostly, she thought about the truth Emma had discovered so naturally, that love wasn't about finding someone who fit into your existing plans, but about recognizing someone whose authentic self complemented your own. A year later, James proposed during one of their Sunday morning pancake sessions, with Emma as an enthusiastic co-conspirator who had helped choose the ring and plan the timing. It was nothing like the elaborate proposal Richard had staged at an expensive restaurant with a photographer hidden among the other diners. Instead, it happened in their kitchen, with flour on the counter and Captain Bubbles swimming lazy circles in his bowl, while Emma provided commentary on proper proposal technique based on movies she'd watched with her friends. "The answer is yes," Sophia said before James could finish his carefully rehearsed speech. "It's always been yes." Their wedding was small and simple, just family and close friends in the community center where Emma took art classes. Sophia wore a dress she'd chosen herself, blue like the sweater she'd been wearing that first morning in their kitchen. Emma served as maid of honor, having campaigned extensively for the position on the grounds that she'd introduced them, and therefore deserved official recognition. During the ceremony, the officiant asked them to explain why they were choosing to marry each other. James spoke about finding someone who made him want to be the best version of himself rather than a different version entirely. Sophia talked about learning that true love meant being seen and chosen for who you actually were, not who you might become with enough improvement. But it was Emma who captured the essence of what they'd built together when she stood up during the reception and offered an unsolicited toast. "Some people think family is just the people you're born with," she announced to the small gathering of friends and relatives. "But I think real family is the people who see all your weird parts and love you anyway." Sophia saw that Daddy makes really bad pancakes and stayed anyway. And Daddy saw that Sophia asks too many questions and talks to fish, and he stayed anyway. And they both saw that I have very strong opinions about fairy house construction, and they stayed anyway. So I think this marriage is going to work out really well. As their guests laughed and applauded Emma's wisdom, Sophia looked around the simple community center decorated with Emma's artwork and flowers from James's small garden, at the faces of people who had supported their unconventional love story, and understood that she had finally learned the difference between a life that looked perfect and a life that actually was perfect for the people living it. Years later, when Emma was in high school and Sophia had become the kind of teacher that former students visited decades later, they would still tell the story of how they became a family. But they never described it as a rescue story because they'd learned that the best relationships weren't about saving each other. They were about recognizing something valuable and choosing to nurture it together. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with someone brave enough to walk away from the wrong choice, and someone kind enough to help them remember who they really were. Sometimes they begin at bus stops in the rain, with strangers who see each other clearly enough to offer exactly what the other person needs. Not rescue, but recognition. Not salvation, but the simple gift of being truly seen. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they begin with pancakes and end with a lifetime of Sunday mornings, built on the radical foundation of loving people exactly as they are. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.